Well, every night I go out running or riding my bike. I like the sweat, I like that flow I get. I like the feeling of the night air hitting my lungs. I like the feeling of rain while sticking out my tongue. Sometimes I like to pretend I'm on a secret mission. Sometimes I'm just making sure there's not something out there happening that I'm missing. And I swear to you, I get a real high from it. Fuck alcohol and fuck all that shit and fuck TV. Let's meet up with our bikes down by the old train bridge. I'll race you downtown and I'll show you what you missed from inside. And let's live our lives tonight. Let's ride our bikes into the night. And let's live our lives tonight.
And we're on. Welcome, folks, to the Garret Schuelke podcast. I am your host, Garret Schuelke, and today's guest is a long time coming. And I say that because I was previously had the pleasure of being on his podcast, and now it is time for me to return the favor.
Well, right on for that. Glad to be here. I guess you should introduce me first, but glad to be here.
Yes, I do. It's a long introduction, so here we go. My guest today contains multitudes, as Bob Dylan would say. He is an Emmy Award-winning coach, creative strategist, podcaster, teacher, social worker, and what I personally like most about him, he is a writer. He runs This Blog Will Change Your Life, as well as This Podcast Will Change Your Life, and is the author of Be Cool, a memoir, sort of, Lost in Space, Orphans, and most recently, UPSTATE, which was previously published as the New York Stories. Folks, let's welcome, straight from Chicago, Ben Tanzer.
Hey man, how are you? Thanks for having me. And it's funny, I feel like I probably wrote some chunk of that bio somewhere, but hearing it out loud, it never ceases to be embarrassing. So good to hear it again. I appreciate that, especially as I've been indoors most of the last year. Good to know there's a world out there, and hopefully everyone's as safe as possible. How are you?
I am doing very well on this Wednesday afternoon. As we were previously discussing, weather is very nice here, 40 degrees in Grand Rapids. How's the weather over in Chi-Town?
It is dramatically improving. I mean, I guess if you live here and if you grew up in upstate New York like I did, you're never allowed to actually complain about the weather. I'll just say that it's been extraordinarily more like Chicago than the last couple of winters. But, today, while kind of grim and bleak, it doesn't seem to be as cold, so we'll take that.
So basically it's a normal February in Chicago, right? Grim and bleak.
I guess it is. Yeah, it's funny. That's a very apt description. It is normal, but just slightly warmer than it's been the last 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah. And as I said, folks, he's coming straight from Chicago via phone because my internet connection is hot garbage. So thank you, Ben, for consenting to this phone interview.
Dude, I'm thrilled you asked. Of course, now I just have to implore you to title this episode Hot Garbage, because that'll put a huge smile on my face.
I might just do that, my friend. You know me, I like to please.
That's awesome. That's already making me smile.
Okay, Ben. Yeah, dude, how have you been recently? Anything new with you?
I think it's very awkward to say, well enough. I do. It's funny. I'm not very religious, but I feel really blessed. Everybody has stayed healthy in my nuclear family. My mother, my in-laws have stayed healthy. People are starting to get the vaccine, doses, and so, I feel like from that perspective, I'm doing just fine. It's so hard to get caught up in your head about what's going well and not going well. At least for me, when I'm thinking about all the folks who are not, in the safest or healthiest conditions. So I think we've been very lucky and, very privileged the last year to primarily be pretty safe. And to be honest with you, be surrounded by people who are trying to be really careful,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very appreciative of that. I'm also appreciative of the people who've made sure I've had work so we can keep paying our bills. So I'm going to say Ben Tanzer is in third person, no less, is doing just fine today.
Okay. Okay, I was momentarily distracted there because it's not you, it's my mom's birthday today, and I tried calling her earlier to talk to her for a sec, but she is busy with something, so I texted her, "Hey, I'll talk to you like an hour or so, about to do a podcast interview," and she has texted me back.
Well, I appreciate taking priority over your mother. Please wish her a happy birthday for me, though.
Yep, happy birthday, Mom. Ben wishes you the same thing.
He does. He really does.
Okay, let's get to the big topic at hand. What I really wanted to talk to you about is your new book. Is called UPSTATE. It was released last year in September. And can you give me a quick summary of what the book is about?
Yeah, right on, man. And I want to thank you for asking about it. You know, it's a re-release, and I always feel like, all right, how much did you promote a re-release? It seems a little something, but I very much appreciate it. You know, UPSTATE is sort of a somewhat revised, definitely refreshed, most definitely re-released version of a collection of short stories I worked on called The New York Stories in its original form. And The New York Stories was the product of, 10 years of short story writing and 3 sort of separate, smaller, almost, what do they call it, like mixtape electronic versions with a local Chicago publisher.
Mm-hmm.
3 collections over 10 years. I mean, I very consciously was writing stories that were interconnected with characters and sort of focused on the same fictional town, modeled on my upstate New York town, and did a collection of stories, maybe 10 or so. Then we did another 10, 4 or 5 years later, and then another 10, 3 or 4 years later. And so I consciously evolved each of those collections. The first one, I don't know if I had a particular mission except to try to capture the people who lived in a small town. And I guess that's not accurate. I think it was very much about the sins of the father. Here I am sounding biblical, but I was very interested in sort of what that looks like for the children and families. And I'm doing sort of the metaphorical father, but also literally fathers and how they may have behaved in this collection. And then the second collection, I had this idea that I would write about sort of the chickens coming home to roost, so what happened to those characters in the first story? What happened to those fathers, their families, those protagonists? And then the third collection, and I can describe this more in a moment if you want, was really about what would it look like if a huge storm hit that town and sort of the town was flooded, right? And all those sins were kind of washed away and cleansed. And it really took on, I guess, I'll make this joke now again, 30 seconds later, more biblical proportions over time, though that was never the aspiration. The aspiration was always telling the stories of people, I know, grew up with, hang out with, and it became these 30 stories. And then that publisher, which is a great publisher, Chicago Center for Literature and Photography, they went defunct. And, honestly, and this is for all the writers out there, I asked that publisher if I could have my rights back. This is about 1.5 years ago, and he was very gracious. No reason not to be, but very gracious. And I really wanted that book out in the world, and so I connected with another local publisher, Tortoise, who does terrific work, but also is very interested in helping sort of revive, refresh defunct books by some really big authors, bigger than me, authors I admire, Billy Lombardo, Christine Sneed. And so I reached out. I know that publisher, and I said, hey, are you interested in keeping that theme alive, saving books? And he did. He wanted to. So we spent a chunk of time prior to and leading into the pandemic sort of revisiting all those stories. And here we are today talking about it.
All right. Well, folks, if you want the full bio of Ben, you can visit his website, which I believe is tanzerben.com.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, but let's go a little bit into your background, though.
Sure.
As I've known you, you've lived in Chicago, but did you previously live in New York?
Yeah, so I grew up in upstate New York, really central New York. I have been corrected over the years, even by family and friends. So I grew up in central New York, where my parents, who were from the Bronx and other places, ended up. Went to college in central New York, so I grew up in Binghamton, went to SUNY Albany, now, what do they call it now? Albany, which is a state school there. And, woke up one morning, looked out the window. This is going to be a theme of this show, Garrett. It was very dreary. It's always dreary in upstate New York. And I looked out the window. I was a couple of months from graduation, and I just thought, I'm going to have to try something different. Like, this is not working. And so I decided on the spot that I was going to move out to the Bay Area, San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley. It just seemed like that's what one might do if they were trying to get as far away from where they were as possible. It also seemed like that's where people went. They went west.
Go west, young man.
Pardon?
Go west, young man.
Exactly. It was like Manifest Destiny, or the narcissistic version. Anyway, so about a month after graduation, I drove to California. A friend of mine, an old college classmate, roommate, drinking buddy, he had a similar idea for himself. And even though, and I really like this guy, especially now, even though he's probably the last person I would have driven cross-country with at the time, we drove cross-country, we had a great time, went out there, was out in the Bay Area for about 2 years, great time to be there, 1990 to 92, sort of pre-.com, pre-money. We lived like kings and queens, low-paying jobs. That's possible now. And then I moved to New York City, where I had spent enormous chunks of my childhood. My grandmother lived in New York. My parents were from New York. And so it seemed like a natural evolution. So then we were my now wife and I were in New York City from 92 to 94. It was actually a great time to be there. It was primarily before the Giuliani era, before they cleaned it up, though I'm not saying that necessarily in a positive fashion. I mean,
I've heard plenty of good stories about pre-cleanup era New York.
Yeah, I mean, it was great. We loved living there. And again, New York was another place, you could still live there cheaply when we lived there. I mean, our apartment was a scary thing, but, and then, which I'm happy to talk about too, but.
Was it like the movie Taxi Driver?
Dude, not quite on that level. But,
okay.
The apartment itself was small, very hard to keep clean, endlessly overrun with cockroaches. Our neighbor, which is a little bit like Taxi Driver, actually, our neighbor was absolutely terrifying, and he blew up his apartment at one point. There are stories from that building. I mean, even the small stories. I remember there was a guy who lived upstairs from us, a young guy. I got talking to him one day on the elevator. New York was friendlier then. Anyway, this guy and I, are we allowed to talk about drugs on this show? Are my children going to listen? Anyway.
Absolutely. Say whatever you want. Use whatever language. This is a free speech zone, my friend.
That's right. Of course it is. Well, the funny part is, and this really dates me terribly, somehow this guy and I got talking about the Doors, and I do love the Doors. I'm sorry. It makes me sound really old. Anyway, he was really excited about this live CD. How he and I got in this conversation is beyond me, but he's like, you got to come over and listen to the Doors. So I did. And he had a ton of weed, and we smoked for hours and hours, which, you can do when you don't have children. And then I never saw the guy again. And then about 5 years later, I'm in New York City on the train, and the guy's sitting across from me, and I was visiting. We're already living in Chicago. And I looked at the guy, the old neighbor, and he goes, "Hey, man, you still live in the neighborhood?" Because I was actually on the train that passed through our old neighborhood. And I said, "No, I've been living in Chicago for several years. What are you doing?" He goes, "I just got out of prison." I go, "No kidding." And he goes, yeah, just was running drugs internationally, got caught in Italy.
Internationally.
And I was like, no kidding. He was I'll just never forget this. He was so calm about it. Anyway, that was the kind of building we lived in back then. And then I always wanted to live in Chicago. And I always wanted to try to get into University of Chicago for some kind of grad program. So I did get into the social work program, and then we came out here. Now it's almost 25 years. So, 94, henceforth, we've been living in Chicago, which is why, you know me as a Chicago person, which I'm honored to be as long as the locals are okay with it.
Yeah, what attracted you to Chicago over New York?
At the time, especially as a younger person, I had a fascination with like seeing and living in every big city I could. So again, I had spent a ton of my childhood in New York City. I'd also spent 2 summers as a young teenager, living in Los Angeles, which this is during the 80s. It was just the fucking bomb to be there then. I'm dating myself again, but I had a real city thing. I had a real public transportation thing. I loved San Francisco. I really loved New York, and I just thought, how many cities can we live in? How many places can we go? And Chicago had this, it's just funny because if you live on the coasts, which I have, Chicago doesn't necessarily have an allure, but it really did for me. Plus, my mother had gone to University of Chicago for undergrad in the 1950s, and in San Francisco, I had been friends with a woman who had gone to Chicago in the early, same time I was in college, late 80s. And, they're both big influences to me at the time, my mom and this woman I was friends with, and they both loved Chicago so much. So it just really took on an incredible allure. And I did have this little fascination, which I totally gacked, that in the 90s, maybe we would move from one big city to another every 2 years for the whole decade. But then we stalled out here. We got jobs. We had a good time. All of a sudden, we had children. Like, all of a sudden, this entire life emerged. Then we never got out.
I don't think I've seen you in person since we did our interview for your podcast, or should I say, I begged you to be on your podcast. Some long lines of like, "Hey, bro, I'm gonna be in Chicago for an entire week. Can I please be on your podcast?"
That may have been the pitch, but dude, that was great. I was already a fan of you and your writing, and honestly,
oh, thank you.
Besides being a fan of yours, like, it has been one of my rules of thumb, which isn't to say I don't drop the ball, that if someone's excited to be on the show, I want them to be on the show. So this, by the way, shouldn't sound like I am denigrating our exchange. Like, I've almost never said no to anyone, and certainly if we're friends, I consider us friends. It is very funny. Like, there's nothing precious about it. If you write, if you're excited, man, I want to make that work. So I was thrilled you reached out.
Yeah.
I'm also really glad it worked out as well as it did. That was a great interview. You're part of one of my favorite sub-themes of this podcast, Will Change Your Life. We did the walk and talk, right? So we were way down in the loop, and we walked all the way up to my neighborhood.
Yeah, I was about that.
Solid hour conversation. It was rock star.
Yeah, I wanted to ask then, I guess without giving away where you live, do you live in Chicago proper or somewhere out in the suburbs?
Yeah, no, I guess it is Chicago proper. No, we're like downtowners for sure. I mean, I really love cities. My wife and I have always joked, which, by the way, is not anti-suburbs in general, because I love suburbs, and definitely not anti-Chicago suburbs.
Oh, man, I have had so many conversations with Chicagoans about Chicago city dwellers versus the suburbs,
Yeah, no, it's a good conversation. All I was going to say, which is funny to me, is that my wife and our running joke was, if we want to live in the suburbs at some point, if we have to, I don't know what that would mean, why would we do it here, right? Then we would just go home. She grew up in the suburbs of New York City. I grew up upstate New York. I don't consider that a suburb, more small town, or somewhat small town. But we always thought, if we need to leave the city of Chicago, then basically we need to leave Illinois. Like, what's the point? We might as well be closer to our family. The benefit was living as we do, downtown, right off the lake, near Lincoln Park. And, it's really funny because we are the worst kind, we're the worst kind of New Yorkers in lots of ways. But one of the funny things about moving here is, even though we lived in New York while it was still reasonably cheap to live there, we got here, we found an apartment twice the size, 500 times cleaner and cheaper, and just cheaper. And we are like as spoiled as you could possibly be in that regard. It was, as soon as we got here, we're like, oh my God, people live like this? Like, I honestly don't really know what people think of Chicago in general, but my feeling is it's, and I sound like a real local, but it's one of the greatest places you could possibly live. I mean, I feel that way about New York City also, and I felt that way about San Francisco when I lived there, so I can be a bit of a, I don't know if it's a Pollyanna, I just get very, very excited about things, but we moved here and we felt like we were royalty, not because we were special, but because we had enough money to live here. We couldn't believe it. And it was clean. I really can't stress when you've been living in a situation that doesn't feel very clean or very safe. And again, we're extremely privileged. I want to be well aware of that. But then all of a sudden you're like deposited in an apartment with a fresh paint job and an extra room and no cockroaches. Then you're like, holy shit, we are living large. Like, we really felt like we were living large when we got here.
Okay, actually I would like to make a slight correction there. When I talked about Chicagoans, about the city versus suburb thing, by Chicagoans I refer to either good friends such as yourself or Robert Dean or John Bruni, who I've talked to in the past, and well, basically random dickheads on Facebook on like Chicago meme pages and that. If someone makes a comment they don't like, they're like, bitch, you're from the suburbs. No one cares about your opinion. Something like that.
Meaning your opinion? Meaning you, Garret?
No, just random things you read off it.
Got it. Well, it's funny, right? So I have 2 teenage sons, beautiful kids, and they're very funny. Like, they take it personally when they meet someone somewhere who says, I'm from Chicago. They get very excited about that. Then they say, so am I. And then the person says, yeah, I live in Naperville or somewhere Elgin, which are great cities. And then they're always like, what? You're not from Chicago. Like, they're like real locals in that regard, and they're always offended. But they're also offended by kids who don't go to public school. So they have a lot more issues than I have, that's for sure.
Yeah. Before we get back onto upstate, I do plan on, or hopefully move to Chicago within the next few years. There's various reasons why I'm not doing it now, but if I have to be honest, if I do move to it, it'll probably have to be somewhere out in the suburbs, since that's all I think I could afford.
Yeah, I mean, again, I have had this odd luck or timing that I keep moving to places when they're not that expensive yet, where you can find, places to live. And so we've done that consistently. It's also possible that I have spent most of my adult life overpaying for housing because my expenses are pretty low otherwise.
It'd be that way sometimes.
I know I'm speaking from a place of privilege. I'm very conscious about that. But it is very funny. We keep moving places, and I keep thinking, okay, we can afford this. Now, that also means we can't afford a million other things. We'll never have a car, I don't know. We need you here, for sure.
Well, personally, I don't mind. Basically, as long as I can afford to live there, and I guess as long as I'm, within walking distance of a CTA line, then I'm good.
Oh, yeah. It's... that again is the beauty of a city, a big city. If they have good public transportation, you can be most anywhere and get most anywhere pretty quickly. Again, we lived there for 25 years. We've never owned a car, and we get all over the place, as do my children. You get on the train, you get on the bus, you get on the metro, and it's fine. You figure it out. Some things take longer, but it's one way we've been able to do this.
That's a very charitable way of putting it.
Well, I do like to be charitable. You know that.
Yeah. Quick shout out to the blog CTA Fails. Love that blog.
I am not familiar enough with it. Clearly, I am a Pollyanna.
Oh, I'll send you a link. It's hilarious. But let's get back to the book. All right, it's
please.
Upstate. It's a republication, new title, new publisher, and I believe when I read the description, there's a new foreword in it.
Yeah, so the publisher, who I love, let's give a shout out to not just Tortoise Books, but the publisher himself, Jerry Brennan, who's an awesome guy, who I was friendly with before. I think he's a great editor, has a great sense of, style and art. But he got very excited about the book. He had gone to West Point and had spent a night, and this is great, he had spent a night for one reason or another in a bar in upstate New York. And so as far as he was concerned, it was the greatest place he'd ever been. And, I write a lot about those towns and those bars. And so upstate is filled with people sitting in bars. And I just think, the stories really spoke to him, even though he wasn't local. So he wrote a great foreword about his appreciation for the book, which I very much appreciate. And then, in particular, this night that he got to spend in a bar, which I love. Because, whatever bar it was, I've been in it 20,000 times.
All right. And is this your first work that you've republished?
That is a good question. I think that's mostly a yes, but sort of a both and. I mean, there was a book, my debut novel, Lucky Man. That publisher may be defunct too, but that was a long time ago. There was another publisher I worked with later, Artistically Declined Press. I did a book with them, You Can Make Him Like You. And
that sounds very familiar, that publisher.
Oh, they're terrific. Ryan W. Bradley was behind it, Paula Bomer. They did a bunch of great books, really was thrilled and remained thrilled to have connected with them when I did. They asked if they could reissue Lucky Man as sort of like a tribute to their favorite authors. So it was a re-release. I don't know if it was needed as much as they thought it'd be fun. And I was like, yeah, of course, give Lucky Man more attention. So that one came back out. Otherwise, no other re-releases yet. But I'm always open to it. You probably know this as well as to a bunch of your listeners. I mean, I've been really blessed with cool small publishers and mid-sized publishers, but they really do go defunct all the time.
Yes.
So New York Stories, Chicago Center for Literature and Photography went defunct, and right after that, Dock Street Press went defunct, who put out Be Cool. So at some point, I've been sort of holding off, really pushing it. Be Cool's going to need another home as well. It's just out there in the world, and that's not good, because it's not really out there in the world. I love that book. Of course, you know this as well. We're very protective of our books.
Yeah, and, Lucky Man, more like Unlucky Man.
Yeah, it'll need a home at some point for sure.
Okay, so I guess we can say that this is like your first major republication.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, how does it feel to do so, republish a book?
It's really fun. What I will say, and I'm a little bit older than you, so I also don't know if this is middle age. I'm certainly was always attached to these stories. It was really enjoyable. I mean, it was enjoyable because Tortoise is great. It was enjoyable because it's fun, as you know, to be in the mix of getting books out. But I will say, this may happen with other books. I don't know. But it was very emotional, too. Like, I felt nostalgic for those stories and the people in those stories. I was a little embarrassed how often I got sort of choked up as I was editing. It seemed, I don't know. I mean, actually, I'm not embarrassed. I guess I was embarrassed by not being embarrassed, but I was like, wow, what the? So I really enjoyed it. And I think it'd be interesting to talk to some other authors about this. I mean, one of the best parts is, and there is kind of a narcissism to it, but, you get to enjoy your own work again, and that's really cool, and I love those stories. And the very first set of stories really, I feel, opened doors for me, and, I'm very appreciative of that. And so to go back and see those stories and see those characters and revisit them, I also am very susceptible. And now I'm a parent of teenagers. I'm very susceptible for the issues, that teens run into, and always was. And, I worked as a social worker for years around issues of child abuse, neglect, sexual abuse. And so I feel very, not the right word is, but I'm very sensitive to what teens go through, have to work through, have to struggle with. And that's certainly an ongoing sub-theme of those stories, right? Mm-hmm. How do teenagers cope? How do they communicate? What are they dealing with? It's not a YA book. I'd love to write a good YA book, young adult book, but it is very much a book about how we cope and how we grow up, and I'll always be intrigued by that. So in this case, it is being intrigued by one's own work, which is a little obnoxious, but really fun. It was really fun.
Okay, and very quickly, how different would you say that UPSTATE differs from the New York stories.
Not significantly at all. You know, it's funny when you refresh something like that. Not that the stories are so epic they can't be touched, right? Everything can be touched. But what you see with a new publisher is that there's certain words they don't like as much, or phrasing they're uncomfortable with. They may think about grammar differently. So I don't know that anybody would read it and think, wow, this is so different. But we did do a sentence-by-sentence breakdown, so it feels different to me. I don't think it reads very different. But again, it's also preferences. And if a publisher or an editor feels strongly about something and I don't, I rarely haggle with them over let's fix this or fix that. So Jerry, very thoughtful comments, maybe one or two things I said, no, I know that feels right to you, but it feels off to me. But really, it's little things, a colon versus semicolon, a certain word versus another word. And people who know me, and both personally, professionally, like, I don't spell very well. I'm not very good with grammar. So,
for real, I feel you, brother. Thank God for spell check.
Oh, I know. And thank God for good editors. I mean, it's funny if I'm helping my children with something, they're both very good writers, but they'll be like, well, how does, they'll say something like, should this be a colon? I'm like, you are so asking the wrong person. And they're like, you're a published author. I'm like, I know, but I work with people who do a much better job than I do with editing. There's just no way around it. Those are the things you start to see, right? So say a previous publisher missed something or I made a mistake, maybe the next person gets it. That's what I've run into.
Yeah, that's one reason why I'm very grateful that we live in the age that we do. Despite, a lot of my nostalgia for the past, say the 60s or the Beat Generation or any of that, it's that has cool aspects and everything, but they were using typewriters and there's no spell check or anything. If I went that way, I don't think I'd be less published than I am now.
Yeah, that's a funny thing. Look, man, every era has ways of improving and making our lives easier than the previous era. It doesn't mean things are better. It definitely means things are easier. I mean, there's all sorts of eras I'd love to have been around for. It would have been awesome to live in New York City in the 70s, and I spent a lot of time in New York City in the 70s, or to be there in the early 80s when I was still in high school, the art scene and all that. On the other hand, it's really nice if you don't own a car, knowing that something like Get-Around exists, or Zipcar. That's a very minor thing, but having an app that lets you find a car you can rent for $5 for an hour, that can be life-changing. It's a minor thing, but, those are things that are real improvements. I hope, I think.
Yeah, have you seen a documentary on Netflix called Crack?
No, what is that?
Oh, it's a Netflix doc that they put out, moderately recently. And it's just about crack, the drug, the crack era during the 80s. New York is a big focus.
That is when we lived in New York during the crack era. We lived on 96th and West End, and on 94th, so 2 blocks south of us, almost like literally just if you could walk through those blocks, there was an entire low-rise building, and the entire building was a crack den where they were making crack. The whole building had been taken over by some group making crack.
Yeah,
and that was all day. It felt like it was right out of the movies or something. But you were just like, we're going to avoid that part of the block.
Yeah.
Not that anything ever happened. It was very safe and quiet. But I had a friend at 95th, it's like 1 block behind us, or south of us, and 1 block south of him was like an entire building they were using to make crack. Which I don't say lightly. It wasn't funny. I was a caseworker back then, and a lot of the kids I worked with, a lot of families I worked with, they were struggling with and destroyed by crack. So there's nothing funny about it. But man, New York City during that era was really something. I had a friend who was a psychiatrist, and he said they had designed like an assessment that they would use with children and families to sort of get a handle on mental health and other issues. And they had written it sort of pre the crack epidemic, and then when the epidemic broke, they could no longer use the assessment because the use of crack was so significant that it had completely skewed their ability to have the conversations they were trying to have. So it was a scourge, man. It was a real scourge.
Yeah, it was a very intense doc.
I'm sure it was. It was a scary time. I used to walk into drug deals when I was at work, and, it's very intense. It was very, very intense, and a lot of families and communities were really destroyed by it. Of course, those are also families and communities like here in Chicago that, a whole series of mayors and other people, other politicians could have been doing a lot more to help in the first place, and this is that endless cycle of neighborhoods being neglected, and that was very much New York during that era.
I highly suggest you check it out if you want some nostalgia, if you want to put it that way.
Okay, right on.
Okay, all right, here's a good opinion question on republishing. Okay, so your experience with Upstate, the republication, has been very positive. Yeah,
yes.
Do you have any opinions in general of republishing work? Good aspects, bad aspects? Do you even think that with some works it should even happen?
I think it's very personal, like everything. To me, the desire is to write endlessly, I always have something I want to write. I'm always writing. I've never tried to pretend, though, there's probably a better word for this, that if I wasn't trying to get published, I'd write anyway. The fact is, I do know I would write anyway, but there's always been a focus on wanting to see that work out in the world, and then wanting to support that work and wanting to read that work. So I don't see any downside. I think the question for any individual writer is this work they're still happy with? Do they still want to share it? Are they proud of it? Those are the questions to ask. Is it being put out by someone you want to work with? I really don't see a downside unless it's work, you're no longer proud of or interested in. I've always said this, I have a very healthy ego about my own work. I'm always really happy with it. Obviously things are always improved and can always be improved, and I hope I've improved over the last 10, 15, 20 years, but I feel good about what I write. When people talk about writing to an audience, it is very funny. I tend to write for my own entertainment. I just hope someone will want to publish it. I rarely think about who's going to read it. I just want to read it. I want to enjoy it, and I want to enjoy myself. And, a push for me, and one of the reasons I'm writing at all, is a desire, to live the sort of best version of every day I can. And I've told this story before, but I woke up 20 years ago and still happily married, really like my wife, love my wife, was doing interesting work, and I was very unhappy. And I thought, why are you unhappy today? Or why are you unhappy? And I thought, I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing things that are satisfying, that fulfill me. I'm really thrilled, but there's something missing. And it felt like what was missing, was writing. And so that's what I got into. And so when you ask me that question, of course, I don't see any downside to refreshing or republishing. Again, unless you find the work doesn't stand the test of your personal time, or maybe it doesn't age well. That's a really interesting question. How well is the work aged? Maybe you don't want it, maybe it reflects ideals or ideas. You don't have at 50 that you had at 25. Those are all good questions to ask. Again, I don't have a good set of questions. I could probably think of some. But it is important to ask yourself, what does this work mean to me today? And if it still has meaning, if it still makes you happy, if it's still engaging, if you think people might still enjoy it, if you enjoy it, why not? Put it out there.
All right. Final question on this subject. Any other work in the future that you plan on republishing?
We'll see. As I mentioned, Be Cool doesn't have a home. So at some point, I want to discuss that. Lost in Space, which is an essay collection on fatherhood, which I really like. That publisher still exists, but they don't totally exist. I'd like to get that out there. I have the tension also that some of the work I've done that people like hasn't been widely marketed, and so might there be a chance to get a bigger audience? So I would be open to discussing most of those books, depending on who was interested in what we were talking about.
Yeah, brother. I must say that's kind of one reason why I've been sticking to self-publishing these past few years. I mean, for one, most of what I've been publishing is my Godin series, which is a superhero genre, pulp genre, which in the grand scheme of publishing, whether it's big or indie, isn't very popular to begin with. Very niche. So, that and, just everything that you described with, small indie publishers, especially when, they go defunct, or, there's problems with, promotions, or, just some really bad stuff that's too numerous to get into. Is one reason why I've stuck to self-publishing all these years. I'm still very open about it, but, I see a lot of this stuff, including, everything you just described, and it's all like, I think I'll stick to publishing this through Lulu.
Yeah, it's funny. To me, the most important thing is that whatever level of control, of happiness, of reach that you're seeking, that's figuring out the publishing model that works for you is most important. And self-publishing gives people, a lot of control, and you get to reap the benefits and beat yourself up if there are mistakes. And there's a lot of power in that. And I'm a big supporter of people feeling like they've got some mastery and control over their life. So, if that's working for you, that's awesome. I'm currently helping a guy, an author, who self-published his debut, get the book out in the world. And, we're getting it out there. And that was the path he chose. It's a terrific book. I'll give it a plug. Memories Live Here. And I'm thrilled that I can help him get that out in the world. He'll decide, I guess, down the road if that's, like you, the path he wants to stay on. I don't know. It's funny because you mentioned free speech or whatever. I'm certainly a live and let live person in general. If no one's getting harmed, that's always been my rule. If no one's getting harmed, you should definitely do your thing. And of course, the publishing, if you're self-publishing, then the only person you're probably harming is yourself anyway. So that's important, man. It's important. It's really important to have a sense of control. It's very hard to feel like any one of us is in control, especially during a pandemic. So I ask everybody, what do you need? What do you need from your day? How do you get there?
Okay, two things I want to point out. One, the whole free speech thing is just a joke by me. It's mostly me satirizing a lot of right-wing, alt-right people who always say, this is a free speech zone, blah, blah, blah.
I know.
That kind of bullshit. And I must confess, too, another reason why I love self-publishing is you may not know this until now, but I am an absolutely paranoid control freak who has to have control of his work at all times.
Well, there you go.
There you go. It's out there. Everyone knows.
Well, perfect. And, look, I've always said, too, this is not an original thought. Free speech is awesome. It doesn't give you the right to be an asshole. But again, that's my rule of thumb. How abusive is anyone going to be? That, to me, is ultimately the criteria for what we're allowed to say or do. And if you're a control freak, sure, maybe you want to, understand that better. I certainly am. But self-publishing, then, is perfect for you, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, to the right, at least, free speech is more like, hey, I want to stay on Twitter and call this celebrity I don't like a bunch of slurs.
I can't even relate to that.
Yeah. Whereas when you and I do talk about free speech, it's more like, hey, I got this book of really great stories, and some of the content may be objectionable to some people, but I still think it's worth putting out into the world.
Right, well, of course, I don't understand going on Twitter and slurring anyone about anything. On the other hand, if I see politics or policies or decision-making that undermines people, again, is abusive, exerts a certain power differential, is misogynistic or homophobic or transphobic or racist, I can't get behind that. That to me is not free speech, right? That's bullshit. And I will call your bullshit on that.
And, well, that's a whole nother topic we get into.
I know, that's a different show, but I didn't want to lose that thread completely.
Hey, we could do that show sometime in the future, man.
Okay, good. Right on. I'm there.
But let's get into another topic. Everyone, UPSTATE is out now, so purchase that.
Please do.
Yeah.
And purchase many copies if that's your jam. I totally support that.
For the love of God, please buy this book.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I'm certainly not above begging for those kind of things. And never have been.
Yep. Same here, brother. Same here. All right. Next topic. I believe this is how I technically got into you, is through the magic of podcasting.
Yeah, right on.
Yep. You have two podcasts. One that you run and produce, called This Podcast Will Change Your Life. Another one which you produce and co-host, I believe, correct?
That is correct. Yeah, dude, you're right on it.
Yep. Called the Blank Slate Podcast, which you co-host with Sam. God damn it. Please, God damn it. I'm so sorry, Sam.
It's Sam Tanios.
Yep. I'll put this out there, Sam. If you ever talk about me, I'll give you a pass to mispronounce my last name all you want.
I will let Sam know that. He'll be quite pleased.
It's pronounced Schuelke, but say Schuelke, say Schuti, however you want. It's a Polish / wannabe German last name. You can fuck up as much as you want.
I will let him know that. He'll be pleased, and he's a very polite dude, but he may want to take advantage of that.
All right, then. Okay, jeez. All right. Podcasting, what attracted you to podcasting as a creative outlet?
Yeah, dude, awesome question. Couple of things. I think the primary thing was I was really interested, first off, in just how one markets anything, So when my first novel came out, the publisher is an awesome guy, but he was like, look, man, you're going to have to figure out how to market things. So early on, he's like, you should try blogging. And really, so I am not the earliest, but certainly an early blogger, writer, person. And once I opened that door, I realized that there were all these sort of creative ways to not just talk about my work, but to talk about lots of work. I mean, anyone's work. And I realized early on, and now we call this good literary citizenship, which I'm a huge support of, but I could promote other people because I love them, so that's awesome, because I'm super fanboy, but I could also promote myself just by promoting others, right? So I've always been very transparent about that. So I started blogging, I checked out MySpace, that's how old I am. And then a local journal asked me to interview the people who led one of the early Chicago podcasts that I know of called Bad at Sports, which has had a significant impact on podcasting. It was an arts podcast. And I interviewed them on this little digital recorder my wife had bought me, because back then I did the occasional journalistic piece like that. And as I watched what they were doing, I remember thinking, I probably can't patch together a whole show. Meaning a whole bunch of segments, but I could keep interviewing people and record it. And I had always been obsessed, I brought this up in other podcasts and other places, with meeting writers and talking to writers. I mean, I can get caught up in celebrity culture as much as anyone, athletes, models, actors, whatever, but I love writers. And so I always loved writers and I always loved reading. And I started thinking, how hard can it be to do a podcast? like other things, how hard can it be to use Twitter? I mean, I'm an early adopter of almost every form of social media, some of which I've dropped, others of which I haven't. But I always had this idea that you could build like a fake media empire. And so it seemed like starting a blog a podcast just made sense. And I loved it. I love talking. I love talking to authors. I love being out with authors. You know, a lot of the early shows were in bars. I was traveling for work. There's lots of drinking. The show has changed over time. It's more refined. It's more long form, which I'm happy to talk about any of that. Some of that conscious, some of it not. But as soon as I tried it, it was like my brain exploded in joy. And so I just started doing that podcast. So this podcast will change your life. It's probably 10 plus years old now, you know, going on 250 episodes. In the early years, maybe I did one a month or so. Now I'm pretty focused on 2 a month. And it's just culminated. And so it's been around. And the new show, The Blank Slate, and that has primarily been literary people like yourself, of all kinds, from all places, doing their thing. No rules, nothing to be precious about. Sometimes I like to talk to other podcasters. I mean, anyone who's sort of being creative, creating shit, being thoughtful, being idea makers. Like, that's the kind of stuff that really, really excites me. And so it just kept happening. The new show, which I can talk as much or little as you want about, is actually a friend and a client. In the last several years, I've been freelancing and consulting and doing other creative things. And this guy has always been a small business, serial entrepreneur, rock star dude. And he decided he wanted to create a podcast about small business and how people think about business. And it really coincided with what's one of my interests, which comes up on my own podcast, which is, how does anybody make anything work? What's your career? How do you survive? What's your philosophy? You know, what's the how? Really, what's the why, I guess. And so he asked me, could I produce a show with him? And that was the first time after all these years, someone's like, I don't have the time, I don't have the skill set, I don't have the whatever, I just want to co-host a show. Can I pay you to produce it? So, you know, it's pretty low-tech. I'm pretty low-tech. It's a little scuzzy.
Are we all pretty low-tech, if you really think about it?
Yeah, I mean, I like scuzzy. You know, it's funny, because this only came to me as an adult, but, you know, the punk aesthetic really appeals to me. You know, make shit, don't get caught up in being perfect, make it cool, make it loud, make it interesting. Like, those are things I aspire to and I'm good at. So, you know, this show for this client, especially Sam, that show out of the gate is really starting to pick up some momentum. I'm thrilled, and we're getting great guests. He's inspired me to want to refine my podcast game. I haven't quite gotten there yet. But we're 30-odd episodes in, so that show we do one a week. And that show's been terrific. So, yeah, now I'm, like, podcasting all the time. And, you know, I want to get better. I'd like to get better equipment, learn more. I've got an idea for a new podcast. I haven't had quite time to start. I'm going to try to elevate slightly more on that one. But that's another thing. I'm not very caught up in being perfected, though I want to be better at everything all the time. But I am caught up in evolving, you know, and so I want to see where the platform can go, where I can go, what I can do with it. But yeah, so now I host my show twice a month. You're a former guest. I've had awesome guests over the years. And now we do the Blank Slate like once a week, and we're 30-odd episodes in. No, sorry, 40-odd episodes in. So it's pretty exciting, man. It's really gotten some momentum.
Okay, I guess we can go by podcast here, but for this podcast will change your life. Is there any particular guests or episodes that you would consider favorites or particularly memorable?
Well, you know, like any parent, I love all the episodes equally. But of course, there have been good episodes. You know, there's a writer from California, Jen Pasteloff, who's now a best-selling author. She was on the show 5-6 years ago, and I don't think I realized, like, what a big following she had. And that was one of the first shows that really blew up, like got really big, and remains the most, I don't even know what the numbers are anymore, but I realized there was the potential to really reach people, and I really love her and had her back on recently. So she's a favorite. There's an author, Donald Quist, He's just a fantastic fucking writer. And, I had him on a couple of years ago. I really liked him. I liked his whole vibe. We become friendly, like you and I become friendly. And then, I asked him to come back maybe 6 months ago because I felt like there was just a lot of negative energy in the world. And I wanted someone to come on who was thoughtful and calm and fucking smart. Actually, it's funny. He and Jen Pasteloff, I asked her to come back, even though I did want to talk about her new book also. So both of them stand out, but there's been lots of guests I like. Wendy C. Ortiz, who writes essay and memoir. She's from L.A. She's a favorite. She's been on a couple of times. Just her whole vibe is very appealing. Obviously, the Garret Schuelke episode, the Walk and Talk, that was genius. The very first Walk and Talk I ever did was with Scott McClanahan, the great writer, Scott McClanahan.
Yeah, that confirms it for me right there, because I was trying to think of, like, the first episode of the podcast I listened to, and, I'm pretty sure it was that one.
That episode was great, and it was funny. He wanted to come to Chicago to do a book reading. He wanted me to read with him. I think I helped him set it up. We went out drinking. We started walking. We took the train together. We walked in the rain. And I just recorded the whole time. And boom. I mean, it's very early in McClanahan as he's getting his voice. And it was a blast. Like, I loved it. It almost felt like a rom-com. I was so happy with that recording.
Yeah. That was the one and only time that I met him so far, was in Chicago during a reading. I don't think it was the one, because I don't remember you being there, so I don't think it was the one that you're talking about, but yeah, that's when I met him. We talked. I asked him, I think, about what book if it was going to be on Kindle or something. Yeah, nice dude.
Yeah, great guy, fantastic writer. So that's an early episode, but just had like the kind of punk energy I wanted to get out of the show. And it was accidental, but he and I always had a good vibe in those days. And again, walking, talking on the train. It's a really special episode. There's been more recent episodes. I think about like the Wendy C. Ortiz, her first episode. Like, I really try not to pry into people's personal lives. The show is the show is the show. The goal is to talk. I always read people's books, so you can always talk about the books. But, the show has also found an energy around people's different challenges. Wendy's memoir, Excavation, which is fucking fantastic, is about a relationship she had with a teacher as a young teen. Like, I didn't look for people to talk about what I thought were important issues, social justice. But that episode, I want to talk about her book, so we had to talk. And I realized that when and where I could, it would be interesting for people to talk about, interesting things, their challenges with mental health, their challenges with drugs or alcohol. And so I don't go looking for that, but there's been some really great episodes because people have wanted to talk about those things. And I'm interested, I'm interested in what you have to write. I'm interested in your childhood. I'm not particularly interested in craft, so I love to talk about craft. It's not that kind of show. I mean, it can be, right? It can be, but it doesn't have to be. And so those shows stand out. Zoe Zalbrod, who lives here in Evanston, who wrote a terrific memoir about sexual abuse, that was a really important episode to me. She's frank. She's transparent. That's an issue I care about. I was thrilled. I mean, she and I are friendly, but I was thrilled she wanted to talk about that stuff on the show. So anyway, I feel like I've been very, very lucky, and there are lots of really, really good episodes and lots of interesting people. I mean, dude, look, you get to do a show. You're doing a show now. Like, it will always feel like a blessing to me. That's for sure.
All right. How about Blank Slate podcast? Any episodes stand out to you there?
Yeah, right on. Thanks for asking. So there's been a bunch of really great episodes. There's a woman who's actually also a client of mine, but her name is Sherry Frey, Frey. I think I pronounce it wrong all the time. She's probably Sherry Fry. Just ahead of, she's very focused on self-care and, female empowerment. And it was just a very touching episode to me, hearing her talk about her work and how it's evolved. That was a great episode. Earlier this week, we talked to a guy named Jim Bennett, who is just super. He's the most recent episode. Just like super inspiring dude. Spoke to a guy, actually, I mean, it's coincidental, but a guy named Jeff Bennett. That episode is really fun because Jeff Bennett is a guy I've known since elementary school. And he runs a business. He's grown. He's still in central New York. And he's just a very thoughtful, and the way I remember him is we were kids, but very thoughtful, very forthright, very chill. That episode really popped. We've had a lot of very, very good episodes. I mean, what's funny is we may or may not even talk about someone's business, but we're very interested in how people think about the business and how they think about the world, and that has proved, endlessly interesting. So certainly both of the Bennett episodes, as I mentioned, Sherry Fry, that was a very interesting episode. There's a bunch. And we've been very, very lucky with that show so far. I mean, lucky, I'm chasing people down. I'm doing prep calls. We're doing all the stuff producers do. But we've really produced some really great episodes with some very interesting people.
All right. That's great to hear, man. I'm glad that you're doing very good on the podcasting here. And, best of luck, too, on your next podcast.
Well, thank you, sir. Yeah, that's a mystery one, but only for a moment, not to be cute. But
okay.
Unless I could actually get my brain turned on, I don't even want to talk about it out loud. But I am planning something totally different in the coming months. If I can literally carve it out of my head.
Oh, very nice. All right, final topic here, man. And I could tell from when we were messaging, this is the topic you were really looking forward to talking about. Very excited. I could feel it coming out from the screen. COVID. You ready, buddy?
Oh, yeah, dude. I could talk COVID all day if you want. I have very strong feelings about COVID.
Let it go, man.
Is there a question,
though? Yeah, I do, actually. And this is a throwback because last year I did my first ever 2-part series called The COVID Life, where I called up previous guests and asked them about how their life has been since the pandemic started. So, I'll ask you the very first question that I asked them. You ready?
Yeah.
It's one of my favorites. When did you realize that COVID was gonna be a bad thing? Like, did you have an oh shit moment?
Oh, absolutely. And this is going to sound super obnoxious, I'm guessing, to some. I would say early, almost immediately, March 2020. As soon as Anthony Fauci, this part's coincidental, but as soon as he said, look, if people are willing to, and I know this is sometime in early March, as soon as he said, if people are listening, I want you to stay at home, that was all it took for me. I am, and I say this unabashedly, though it could sound very dick in certain circumstances, like, I'm a rules follower, so as punk as I want to be, I follow the rules. But
you're a very good boy, Ben.
I'm a very big believer in science, and I spent years doing prevention work and focused on data and best practice and evidence-based work. I ran a huge grant for 8 years in partnership with the CDC. So, I'm a true believer in science. You don't have to hit me over the head. You just have to tell me this is what we know now from the data. And so, I don't remember how early it was. I think it was literally the first week of March, last week of February. It was about a year ago now. Dr. Fauci came on. He said, look, I just need all of you minimally to shut down for 5 weeks, which people barely did. And my wife and I listened, and I said, let's shut down for 5 weeks. And my kids didn't go back to school. We didn't leave the house. And within 2 weeks, we were wearing masks all the time. And, I'm not prescient, right? It's funny saying it now. He said it, and I just accepted it. And, it's funny. I would say to anybody who pushes back on that, that's not being a sheep. If a leading scientist is like, please be cool for 5 weeks, I don't need to hear any more than that, And so, yeah, I've been super COVID focused. To me, the irony, for lack of a better word, and I know you especially work with people who don't believe this, everything the CDC said last March was accurate. It turned out that things have taken much longer than they expected. They've refined things. But immediately they said, if you can do this social distancing thing, which no one understood, that wasn't a common part of the vernacular, if you can wear masks, if you can stay home, and there's a lot of ifs, right? Some people have to go to work. I'm lucky enough to not have had to go to work because I was already working at home a lot. So I'm lucky. I mean, I want to stress that. On the other hand, my wife lost both of her jobs. So she was not lucky. My kids are not lucky. They had to stop going to school. One of them did not get to have a senior graduation. One of them didn't have an 8th grade graduation. On the other hand, they're both healthy, and a lot of kids aren't. So I was in from the first week we were told to be in. And I would say everything they said was accurate. It's just been a lot worse than I anticipated. And that's unfortunate. But yeah, I mean, look, nothing, if you go back and look at all those early press conferences, nothing they said turned out to be incorrect. You can decide you don't care, which I said to you before. That's a certain kind of argument. You can tell me this is an issue of rights. It is not. You don't have any right to make anyone sick. Fuck that. But everything was said was accurate. In other countries like New Zealand, for example, Australia, Japan, even though Japan fumbled it a bit out of the gate from what I've read, they just shut down. And now they're back to living normally and people aren't dying. And they certainly don't have 500,000 dead. I mean, when people say to me, sorry, I can easily get worked up, so I will cut myself off. When people say, I don't know anybody who's gotten sick or died, which, by the way, I find that fascinating because I know so many people who've gotten sick.
Same here. Same at my job.
So I'm not going to argue with anyone about that. It's possible you live in a place you haven't met anybody. I have friends all over who've gotten sick or have family members who've gotten sick. But there are 500,000 people who've died because of COVID. That's not a political statement. That's data. And if that's not a big enough number for you, then I know that means we're communicating about COVID poorly. But to dismiss that, to me, is about the highest offense there can be. Those people died. And that's not, again, it's not political. That's not about either party. That's not about the CDC. I just know that we now have 500,000 people dead in 12 months. And so please don't tell me this is not a real thing. I don't understand it. I don't accept it. There's no discussion about that.
Yeah, you're mentioning your kids there. How about right now, since last time I checked, since I try to keep up on Chicago news at least once a week, there's currently a battle on whether schools should open or not.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. The focus is really on K through 8, but that has been an ongoing battle / discussion.
Yeah. Will you be sending your kids back to school?
It's very tricky, man. So nobody's asking high school kids to go back to school. So I'm in the awkward, weird position of I don't have to send my 9th grader anywhere. They're not even really talking about high school. That will change. I will let my 9th grader decide, though, if there's some flexibility. I would not have made him go back this spring if he didn't want to. I'm happy that the CDC and others seem to be reporting that there are ways for kids to go back to school safely. Again, if you're wearing masks and respecting social distance and people are getting inoculated, man, right on. So, I don't know. The funny thing is, my older son got into college, which is wonderful. If that's your thing, that was his thing. Mm-hmm. And the University of Illinois really wanted, and I'm sure some of this is financial among other things, but they wanted everybody to come to campus. So, he's been living on campus, fall semester, now spring semester, but not going into a classroom. U of I has been very cutting edge, and it's been fascinating to watch them. So, my wife and I had decided that we didn't have to talk about this in depth. If he had said, I need to live at home for the fall semester, I don't feel safe, we would not have fought with him. But we also felt insistent he should go and just be as careful as possible. So it's been a very interesting dance, and I think both the kids have been more or less thriving in really terrible situations. Like my younger one, the high school he's in, he's basically at the computer 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. every day with minimal breaks and a lunch break.
Oof.
But he's done fairly well. The older one, his schedule's all over the place, but he's wearing a mask, he's in a dorm, he's not going to class. But just this week, one of his friends got COVID. So It's scary, dude. I mean, that's the other thing. It's still very scary. But we definitely insisted he go to school unless he was going to push back, and he didn't.
Yeah, how about vaccine-wise? Have you or any of your family members gotten it or are scheduled to get?
My mother got it, as did my in-laws. They're all in their 80s. So thank God they live in other states, New York, Pennsylvania. My older son works in the cafeteria at his school, and so he is treated as an essential worker at University of Illinois. So he got the first dose. It seems impossible that my wife or I or my younger son are ever going to get a dose. I guess we will eventually late spring or summer. And I really want to stress, and this is, it's okay with me if we have to wait. Our lives exist indoors. It is a drag, but it's cool. I don't have underlying conditions. I'm not a child. I'm not an older person. You can save me for last. And by the way, I'm not trying to sound like a hero. Like it's fine. I just don't know when I'm going to get one. And Illinois' rollout has been terrible, from what I read. It certainly.
Oh yeah, it's been terrible all over.
Yeah, and it's been terrible all over. So, but I'm certainly pro-vaccination, and my understanding is so far it's been highly successful. So right on. They just haven't vaccinated very many people.
All right. We talked about your family. How about Chicago? From your perspective, how has the pandemic changed the third largest city in the United States?
I mean, dude, it's funny. The early months, it was like a ghost town. I mean, it was really crazy. And I'm a runner, so I've been running all over. And, to run on the streets, I mean, it's slowly shifted. And you'd be downtown, and there's just no cars, there's no people. Like, that has slowly shifted. But, it's really tricky. People are barely on the trains and buses. I haven't been on public transportation literally at all since March 2020. And so we just walk everywhere or get a car. I just don't feel safe. And so there was like a medical crisis I had to deal with in March 2020, and I took the train because it was time sensitive, and I haven't since. And I haven't, I also teach. One of my side hustles is teaching. I've been in a classroom. So, Chicago is very, very weird. Our neighborhood, I think, has not been mask-centric enough, so it's very stressful. Other neighborhoods seem to be better, so I don't know how that works. I do think not Generation X, which I am, and not Generation Z, which my children are, but the millennials / Gen Yers seem to be a little less into masks, and I think the data supports that. And a lot of that age group lives in our neighborhood. So I have found that sort of stressful,
As a millennial, that is very sad to hear, but not surprising.
Yeah, so that's a little weird to me. I do say that with judgment, but, I haven't been going out a lot. So it is tricky. When you go out and half the people you see aren't wearing masks, it's impossible not to think, how the fuck are we ever going to get out of this? And this idea that the vaccine will save everything has always been very upsetting to me. But that's why we have 500,000 dead people in America as of this week. And that's why, right, we still are going to be shut down primarily through the fall and really into next spring. Like, we're probably a year away from being somewhat back to normal. That's what all the data is saying. So here we are. Here we are, man. I just want to stay healthy. And I want everyone else to stay healthy. Like, that's the thing. This is something I'm not very narcissistic about. I want everybody to be healthy. It's fucking scary. If people don't think it's scary, I don't understand what they're reading or not reading.
All right, and if you have an opinion, how do you think the mayor of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, has done?
It's so painful. Someone tweeted the other day, politicians who've been much better than I would have expected. Governor Pritzker. And Governor Pritzker has been great. Politicians who've been less good than I expected. Lori Lightfoot. She doesn't quite seem ready for prime time. I hate that. I really like her. And I like her brusque style. I think she's really smart. It doesn't feel like she's been up to the task. Now, one thing I would say, though, is, and I would say this about most politicians, clearly other countries will prove this wrong, most people were not really sure how to handle an epidemic. So I'm willing to, give the mayor a little room there. I think most mayors don't really know how to handle protests, and certainly riots.
Oh boy, yeah. Funny you should bring that up because I think there was a recent report that said Lightfoot was funneling money that would be used for COVID into the Chicago police.
Well, that's a whole other thing, right? So she shifted or redirected money that was for COVID relief. So, when you redirect money, that means people who had problems getting work, with rent, with groceries, they weren't getting money that should have been going to them. So there is a level of mismanagement that seems, makes me sad. I don't know that I'm totally schooled enough to sound as smart as I'd like to about it, but she has not totally felt ready for prime time. I didn't think Rahm was up to the job either.
Well, pandemic aside, from what I've observed from Lightfoot, and basically when I got into Chicago, when I started visiting, it was when Rahm Emanuel was mayor. So him and Lightfoot are like the two mayors I'm most well known of. It seems like Lightfoot, along with Emanuel and Daley, and like past ones like Daley, they all kind of seem to follow the same pattern of mismanagement, fuck ups, and seemingly hating the public school system.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, dude. You have a job. I've always had jobs. Like, you constantly meet people or work under people who are not prepared to be leaders, right? And that, I think, is one thing you're seeing. Rahm Emanuel's probably a great investment banker. He's probably a great chief of staff, though I don't think he did Obama any favors as a whole.
Oh, God. I hated that line, too, about, Rahm Emanuel's great because he's Obama's friend.
I mean, it's just obnoxious. So, Lori Lightfoot, I think, is a great lawyer. I think she's really smart. I really like her, but that doesn't mean you're ready to be mayor. I mean, that to me is really the discussion. When I made the reference prime time, but it's really about, are you prepared to be in charge? I wish I had more data. My experience is most people aren't ready to be in charge, which, by the way, is not even intended as a criticism. It's, have you had the right jobs, the right mentors, the right experiences? That's the question. If you haven't, then you're going to have problems. And Illinois, especially after having lived in California and New York, seems especially poor at identifying good leaders and people who aren't corrupt. So I don't think Rahm or Lori are remotely corrupt, or Pritzker.
But
there's a lot of corruption in this city, in this state, and there's a weird sort of pride in that, and that I always find amazing.
Yeah, when I made a post, a month or two back about our former governor, Rick Snyder, who's currently on trial right now for his part in poisoning Flint.
He's a fucking criminal.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But he's probably going to get away with it, just like Trump. But
he's got blood on his hands.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. God. He's like George Bush level bad. But one thing that fellow Chicago writer John Bruni pointed out was that Illinois governors have a tendency to leave office in handcuffs.
Oh, it's incredible. It's incredible. Again, that's why I was sort of joking. Like, it's almost like a weird badge of pride here. Like, I'm a fucking crook. And it's amazing. It's really amazing to me.
Yeah, I know. That's kind of one of my favorite aspects of Chicago history up until today is just that it's a big Democratic machine or something that they label it.
What do they call it? Yeah, it is always the Democratic machine, but there seems to be another word.
Yeah, I know, I'm missing it, but especially with like mayors like John Daley who like really emphasized it. But it's one of my favorite things. But another funny aspect that I have put this question online is that as you're aware, our current governor, Gretchen Whitmer, really did her best to contain the pandemic. And so much so that she almost got kidnapped for it by local militias.
Yep.
I kind of made a joke of who was the better girl boss, Gretchen Whitmer, who shut down an entire state, or Lori Lightfoot, who shut down the third largest city in the U.S.
You know, I want to say, by the way, I think Lightfoot has done a very good job around COVID. I think she's done a less good job around understanding crime, and really, which is a consistent thing with the mayors in the city, sort of understanding and addressing what the neighborhoods that have been neglected for so many decades need, right? I think Governor Whitmer, from what I've read and seen, was trying, and I think very successfully, well, not successfully, but was trying to prevent COVID from spreading. And, you know, your state in particular was not having it. And it's stunning to me.
Oh, no.
It's stunning to me.
I know. Michigan is, I say this as a Michigander, so, Michiganders who love this show, sorry, it's sad but true what I'm about to say, but, yeah, Michigan is a very backwater, right-wing state that somehow, for some reason, keeps voting in Dems and generally, well, unless you count the 2016 election, generally votes blue. And that's why we got so many, you know, militias and white supremacist organizations.
Yeah, you guys are definitely fans of your militias there.
Oh yeah, we can't get enough of them.
Well, and, you know, it's interesting seeing Merrick Garland speak, who I really admire and have always admired. But again, I'm going to the science. I'm not going to my emotions, which I will be happy to go to also. But if there's a bigger issue in this country than white nationalism and domestic terrorism, I don't know what there is. I mean, there are lots of issues, including COVID and other inequalities from race to gender. But Jesus, domestic terrorism in this country is terrifying and has basically gone, at least outwardly, untouched and I mean, again, I know people are always doing things behind the scenes, and you know, but wow, the country gets a handle on that.
You're gonna enjoy this little Michigan factoid. Twice since they had the attempted insurrection, MLive, which is like our big media conglomerate here, makes up, you know, the biggest papers like the Grand Rapids Press and whatnot. Twice they've interviewed like two guys who took part in it. And as far as I know, neither of them have been arrested by the FBI for it.
It's, you know, man, it's like, so offensive. I mean, it's amazing to me that in 2021 or 2020 or literally any time in the history of the universe, they could show the pictures of the people who are in the capital of Michigan and not think, oh my God, someone has done something terribly wrong that we're watching this happen live. I mean, it was terrifying to me what happened. And not because I was scared. I mean, I'm in my high-rise building in Chicago. But the idea that these guys with guns could march up to the Capitol and no one's going to stop them? How is that even possible?
Well, it kind of helps when the police are on their side, if not part of the militias themselves.
Well, that I'm going to stay away from, because that I don't know enough about. But it's very
It helps, let's put it that way.
And it's just dangerous, you know? It's just dangerous.
All right, well, final question on this topic. And this is my second favorite question, aside from the first one I asked you. When do you think this pandemic will, quote-unquote, end? And what do you think a, quote-unquote, post-COVID world will look like?
That's a big, awesome question.
I know, that's why I like asking it.
From what I read, and it would be awesome to be a scientist right now, things will probably not feel pronouncedly, if that's a word, different until about a year from now. So that seems pretty likely that we're looking at spring of 2022. You know, that things will start feeling better. I'm sorry to use my social work language, but things will start feeling better during the summer, spring/summer. The fall, winter will remain a little shaky. But somewhere by next fall, winter, most people will be vaccinated, and it'll really be spring of 2022, so a year from now. It'll basically be 2 full years, which, from what I read, is probably not significantly different than the Spanish flu epidemic, from 100 years ago, except that less people will die. So my understanding is that seems like where we're going to end up with that. So that's my first piece. I think what you're going to see differently, and what I hope, because I hope people will learn, right, is one, the world of work will be different. People have more respect and understanding and belief that, hey, people can work at home, they can work anywhere. And lots of people are already doing that, which is great. I believe people will be more focused on their health and being careful and washing hands and wearing masks. I think that mask thing is going to linger. On the other hand, knowing human beings, everyone's going to be rushing right back into crowded concerts and crowded clubs and doing all that. What I think is going to be interesting, to me the most unknown part is going to be, will there be more respect for science? Will there be more respect for vaccinations? That's the part that remains unknown. There's a lot of people who want to push back on those things, and I don't really understand it. I understand elements of it, but that's unfortunate. But I do think work will look different, and school will look different. I do believe that there'll also be a lot of things we'll just jump back into, and somewhere in the middle, I think there really will be a question of, do we trust scientists? Do we trust politicians? And I think that remains open to interpretation.
All right, I agree with a lot of that, and here's what I would add to it. I think there will be more tighter government control, especially with surveillance, because seeing how the activities from 2020 throughout up to the insurrection, yeah, it's gonna be bad. George W. Bush level bad, Patriot Act kind of stuff. I think there will be that. I think there will be more feuding with China, a quote-unquote Cold War II kind of scenario, since we're going to be pointing fingers at them for probably all time now about this. You caused this virus.
Right.
And,
I have to say, I'm always going to push back on the extent, whether not all the information was shared, it's going to be very unfortunate if the universe as a whole can't understand that in the universe of climate change and other steps that countries are unwilling to take, that pandemics may just be a thing of the future anyway.
Oh, yeah, I fully agree with that one, too. And,
that kills me. I mean, it's just so unthoughtful. And again, whatever people's opinions on China are, this idea that we're just going to hold them responsible for everything because that's so convenient and lazy is really, really unfortunate, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done across the board.
Yeah, and in regards to COVID, God, as much as I hated the comparison at the beginning, and I still do, I think it will become like the flu in a way, where we'll have to get a shot every year for it. I mean, I was kind of hoping at first it would be kind of like these diseases that we've mostly wiped out, like measles or smallpox. It's mostly gone, but then it pops up somewhere in these weird anti-vax communities. But I'm pretty sure now it'll be, especially with how it's mutating, that it'll be something that we're going to deal with technically the rest of our lives. And like the flu shot, we'll have to get a shot for it every year. And like the flu, we kind of already did this in 2020. It'll be like, oh, what's that? You died of COVID? Well, you should have a better immune system. Sorry. That's kind of how I see it, unfortunately.
I think there'll be a level of it lingering, and we'll be able to address it. And frankly, the question will be, this would probably be the other comment I have, which ties into my previous response, which is, will we be willing to be better prepared for the next pandemic? Because it would seem there's going to be one.
Oh yeah, undoubtedly. And the final one, and I read this in a British tabloid, so there you go, take it for what it is. And I was excited when I first read it, but now I'm not so sure. But it made this bold claim that once COVID is quote unquote gone or cured or whatever, that we will become like the Roaring Twenties, which, being in isolation and away from people, we will just become completely debaucherous. All the drugs, all the sex, all the dancing, because like, hey, we're finally free. Man, we missed this. Let's do more of it. Which
I think there'll be an element of that.
I mean,
and really, I think there's been a huge increase in alcohol and drug use, during the pandemic anyway, at least in the limited pool of people I interact with. But there will be some of that. What I hope, of course, is that it doesn't overwhelm the dialogue around, okay, what are we going to do next and how are we going to prevent this next? Because, I don't think this is going to be an isolated thing and then in 100 years we're going to say, oh my God, there's another pandemic. If climate change is real, which I believe it is, this is all tied together. And I hope we don't party so much that we ignore the fact that we have work to do. But that's me being super preachy. And that may be the way we finish this conversation. And if so, I apologize.
Yeah, well, it appeals to me because I like the party and, well, be hedonistic. But on the other hand, I'm old enough to, well, think things a little more rationally now. But, hey, I guess we'll see what happens.
That would seem to be a thing, yes.
All right. Well, technically that's the last topic I want to talk to you about, but there's one last thing that I want to quickly go about. And I thought about this when we were talking about Chicago as a whole. Like I said, you live in Chicago, and it's technically the middle of winter. Have you, in your neighborhood, ever had to deal with the phenomenon known as dibs?
Oh man, I knew you were going there as soon as you wrote it.
Well,
Dibs does not seem to be a thing in this neighborhood.
All right. Well, very quickly for people who don't know what I'm talking about, dibs is a practice where you dig out a parking space in front of your house or in front of your street or wherever, and since you dug it out, you feel entitled to it, so you put shit around your parking spot, like a chair or cones or something, that indicates that it's your spot. You called dibs on it. And it has led to many a conflict over the years, particularly with, like, people just ignoring it and then getting their car vandalized. But there's a lot of great YouTube videos on it. It's one of my favorite things about Chicago.
It's an awesome thing, though I have to say, again, I'm not a big guy.
Awesome.
It's not a thing in our neighborhood, and we don't own a car anyway, but I have to say, it offends me so profoundly. I cannot stand it. I hate that it exists, but that is ridiculous because, again, it has literally no impact on me.
Yeah, I too think it's ridiculous, but at the same time, I understand it.
Absolutely. Look, if my hometown had something similar, I would celebrate it. So I'm not above it. I just think, oh my God, how can this be a thing? It's so obnoxious. But again, I'm not affected by it, so that's just me complaining unnecessarily. Though I'm glad you teed that up.
Yeah, have you ever seen it? Like, have you ever gone through neighborhoods with people have like Christmas statues or something indicating where they park?
Dude, it's all over the place. And again, it doesn't happen to be where we live, but when you get into the real neighborhoods, oh yeah, it's everywhere. It's crazy. Again, I find it so. Would probably be the accurate thing to say is I find it so offensive and awesome all at once.
Yeah, there's this old YouTube vid. I'll send you a link to it later. That some Chicago comedian made years ago, where his character was just calling dibs on everything and putting a chair on it. Like when he went to the gym, he put a chair on the treadmill. He went to a party and found a girl he found attractive, and he put a chair on top of her, calling dibs. It's hilarious. It's hilarious. Yeah. All right, dude. It's been over an hour and a half. I believe it's time that we end this conversation.
Well, then we will end it, dude. It was just a thrill. I like to talk to you anyway, so here we've recorded it, and hopefully we have some nuggets for your legion of fans, and they can enjoy that.
Indeed, a legion of fans they are. Schuelkeites, as I call them.
That's good. It's good to have a name for your fans.
Yep.
So,
All right,
over that.
All right, Ben. Promo time. Is there any websites you want to advertise? Any books? Obviously, we talked about it.
Look, man.
There's anything you would like to promote?
I'm thrilled when people want to get upstate. I'm really glad that a book can be re-released, and folks like yourself want to talk about it and buy it. It's very humbling. I always invite people to come to tanzerben.com, which is my website, and see what I'm up to and see if they have any questions, and check out the books and other activities. I'm all over social media. I really do enjoy it. So you can find me on Twitter at TanzerBen. You can find me on Instagram. I think that's Ben Tanzer. You can find me very easily if you want to, and if you want to, of course, I am absolutely thrilled to connect with you. So that I would say, unequivocally.
All right, folks, and if you want to find me, as always, GarretSchuelke.tumblr.com is the main place to find all my work and links and all that. You can find me on Twitter. My personal is at Garret Schuelke. The podcast Twitter is at Schuelke Podcast. And, you can find me on Anchor, Spotify, Breaker, Internet Archive, a few other places I'm not listing. Oh, and recently you just got put onto Listen Notes and, Audio Mac, I believe it's called. I'm very determined to have my podcast on every platform that allows free, unlimited uploads. That's kind of my new goal.
Dude, good goal. Which, by the way, then I should also promote this podcast will change your life, which you can always find and access at tanzerben.com, and then the Blank Slate podcast, which is off of the Human Elements website. But again, luckily, like yourself, these podcasts are, all the places people go to find podcasts. So you can find us, and we'd be thrilled to have you do so.
Yep, and I would like to dedicate this episode to the poet Lawrence Ferlinghetti, who just passed away yesterday.
Yes, absolutely. God, it's incredible. 101.
Yep, and according to the article, I think he was a month or two shy of 102 years old. But yeah, great poet, great publisher, great beat generation example.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's something to aim for sure.
Yep, just passed away yesterday. And, rest in peace, brother.
Yeah, man, right on. And, dude, thank you for having me. It's always great to connect with you. I'm always happy to talk about what I'm up to, and it's fun just to rail on some shit, too. I'm inside a lot, like a lot of you, so I welcome the opportunity to talk.
Yeah, indeed. I would love to have you back on, Ben.
Okay, bud, I'm going to hold you to that.
All right, thank you, Ben, for being on, and thank you, everyone, for listening. Check out my stuff. Check out Ben's stuff. Go read Lawrence Ferlinghetti's work. He more than deserves it. And that's the end of this podcast. Here is the outro song.
Young, I couldn't wait to grow up, like I was racing to an early grave. Now that I'm older, got the world on my shoulders, all I wish is that I could have stayed. My mother told me I could be what I wanted if I'd only get my ass out of bed. Well, mama, I'm trying just as best as I can to do some living here before I'm dead. And all that I know is I got a ways to go before I'm there. They told me in school I'd have to play by the rules if I was ever to get out ahead. So I played by the rules, and here I sit like a fool, just to try to keep myself well fed. to the country and start a new life with you. We could have a garden, maybe 1 or 2 daughters, and raise a couple chickens too. Or we could grow old, just like in the stories told when we were young. Chickens too, or we could grow old, just like in the story.